Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Match It and the Other Guy. And Kevin and I are once again sitting outside my home in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the banks of Lake Wylie. And I have to say, Kevin, today the sky is an absolutely perfect Carolina blue sky. And when I first moved to Charlotte, lots of folks said you will love the winter days in Charlotte, in sharp contrast to winter days in England, because in England everything is grey and damp and miserable in the winter, typically. And in Charlotte, I mean, the sky is absolutely beautifully blue.
Well, this is our payoff for those humid days of July and August that we have to suffer through to get to this point.
Yes.
But we're wearing layers today, and it's very crisp out on the porch.
Yes. The thermometer tells me it's 72 degrees, but it
not on the porch.
Doesn't feel like that, does it? It feels about like 62 degrees. But all right. Well, one thing we haven't decided yet, and I never know the answer to this until we start, is what we're going to be talking about today. So, Kevin, start us off. What is our topic of conversation for episode 10?
Well, our topic today was kind of inspired by me watching an episode of Antiques Roadshow recently, which made me think everybody's got great stories of great finds.
Yes.
So, what's some of your great finds? Be it finding a stash of money, be it finding something just odd at random as you were going through somewhere, or maybe a treasure you found in a thrift store or antique store. So it's good, multifaceted. But
yes. Well, I'll tell you one thing.
Finds.
One thing I have never found, not really, is money on the floor, or dropped money for whatever reason. But
really,
I always think about that because I had a school friend when we were sort of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that sort of age. And he was seemingly forever finding, £5 or a pound note on the floor, £5 note in, on the park grounds or whatever, sort of at least a couple of times a year. And I never found anything. The only exception to that, and again, I've never really found anything on the floor, was in the Paris metro system. When I lived in France for those 15 years, I would take the train from Cognac, Bordeaux, up to Paris, in the south of Paris, to Montparnasse station, then cross Paris on the metro system to the Charles de Gaulle airport, spend the night in Charles de Gaulle airport or on the left bank in Paris, and then the next day fly over to New York for the race. I used to do that every race, so it was a journey I knew very well. But one particular day I was going through the metro system and looked down on the floor, and lo and behold, there was a €50 note on the floor. Right? I thought, wow, my luck has changed, it's €50. And as I went down to pick it up, a door opened, one of those sliding automatic doors that there is a lot on the Paris metro system.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
The door opened, and the gust of wind blew the note the other side of the door, and I couldn't get it. And I just saw this chap on the other side of the door. His face beamed with a big smile as he realised the note had blown towards him and away from me.
Oh gosh!
And then the door shut, and it was gone. So I've never had any luck with money. How about you?
Well, as far as finding money, actually, I think the most I found at one time was $60.
Oh wow!
Yeah. It was in Tennessee. We were going to the Tennessee football game, and we pulled into a parking spot, and I opened the door to get out and just looked down, and there was this little Velcro wallet. So I picked it up and opened it up, and the only thing in it was 320s and a couple of, it had those little flaps for photos in it, and it had a couple of pictures of maybe third grade, fourth grade age kids and their school pictures. So I was thinking it probably belonged to somebody of their schoolmates.
Yeah, but there's no address or anything to
nothing else in it whatsoever. So there's no way for me to return it, which I would have obviously, but there just wasn't any way to do it.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the most. I have found 40 at one time as well.
Whoa.
I definitely found a 20 one time.
What?
Yeah, another 20 was just blowing by.
You're as lucky as my old school friend. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me that's destined never to find anything on the floor.
And one of them early, this was probably back in junior high. We were friend of ours. His mom was a realtor, and she was representing a commercial property, and so she hired us to go mow the property to make it, presentable and nice. So she was going to give us a little bit. Well, I'm mowing along, and lo and behold, I find this very old, faded, tattered $5 bill to go on it. So I got a bonus for the day.
So, good on you.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta love it. You just never know.
Well, you're born lucky, as they said.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
What did David Hobbs always used to say? One of David Hobbs' great line is, "Better to be born lucky than good."
It'll
Right.
often save you. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've never been lucky at finding money on the floor. Not really. But the one thing that sticks in my mind that I did discover, and I was absolutely thrilled to discover it, was once again, this is a France story, my life in France story. I was restoring an old Citroën Traction Avant, which is an old 1937 car, of which there were an awful lot in France at one time. And they're a terrific, fun car. Anybody that's interested in mechanical engineering will know the Traction Avant. For several reasons. It had torsion bar suspension decades before Formula One ever thought this was the way forward, and it was front wheel drive. Again, this is in the 1930s.
That is pretty progressive.
Yeah, so there was a lot going for it, and they're very, very simple mechanical things, really. So and relatively easy to restore and this is the big if you can find the parts. And a lot of parts are now being remanufactured, but some parts aren't. And on the front windscreen of a Traction Avant, you can open and close the windows like a vent at the front screen, you know, as some folks would say, real fly-in-the-face motoring. And so you could open the vent and it would, that would cool the car down. And my Traction that I had a broken control knob. It had been broken over the years, and I couldn't find one for love nor money anyway. Could not find this particular piece. And so my window on the Traction was always permanently closed. Well, one day I'm strolling through the woods and forests around Charente, around where I lived in France, looking for mushrooms. It was mushroom season. It was about this time of year, actually, sort of October, November time. Mm-hmm. And I discovered in the woods an old wrecked Traction Avant, a rusted out shell. Still had the motor in it, still had a lot of the suspension component on it, and, well, you know where this story's going. Surprise, surprise, the window regulator knob was in the car.
I love it.
So there it was. Yes, it was. Yes, absolutely lost in the forest, and it helped me out that day. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. How about you? What's your greatest find?
Well, as far as like just finding something, this one's just kind of rather odd. Growing up, we lived on a dead-end street, so there was about, I think, maybe 16 houses on the whole street, 8 on each side. And at the very end, when you got to the end, it just literally stopped and there was woods.
Yes.
And
so would you call these, forgive my interruption, would you call that a cul-de-sac?
No, I always think a cul-de-sac has to have that kind of circular end to it, where this one didn't. It just literally the road ended. But it's funny, they have built a cul-de-sac in there since.
Yes.
So now you go, they've added a cul-de-sac and probably put in maybe 5 more houses around that circle.
Yes, okay.
But at the time, it just literally ended at the end of the road. Wasn't even a barrier or anything. It's just like, you go 5 feet further, you're going to be in a tree.
Yes.
But
now the reason I asked that is thinking about French. Cul-de-sac in France means the bottom of the bag.
Oh, okay.
So if you look at the design of it, now you can see cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Voilà.
I've heard it 1,000 times, but never knew the reason.
That's right. You learn something every day on this podcast, folks.
But for some reason, a friend of mine and I, we were playing in the neighborhood, and about 9 years old, I'm thinking, and we just decided to go trotting through the woods and go back.
Right.
And there was a little creek that ran through there. So, the bank, it would be a little divot, where the creek had made its way through.
Yes.
And I looked down, out in the middle of the woods, there's one of those big wheels that you ride.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
How it got there, who put it there,
yes.
I have no earthly idea. But I'm like, well, this is great. So I drug it out. We walked, drag it down to it must have been summertime because I remember it being fairly warm.
Yeah.
And we just got the hose out, and they were kind of hollow on the inside. And I took the hose in one of the little holes there and blasted that thing, and mud just came out of it and everything. But that's how I got my big wheel. And my friend had a green machine at the time. I don't know if you remember that one. It was made by the same company.
No.
And he moved these levers in the back would turn.
Okay.
So he had that, and I now had the big wheel, so we were set.
Yes. I never had, and I can't think of any of my friends that had the big wheel in England. But I've seen them, and I've seen Stewie from Family Guy. He's a big fan of his big wheel.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
So is that front wheel we're talking about? It was like 2 dish-shaped mild steel parts put together. Is when
I
you
don't
said
think there
that's-
was any steel on that wheel. I think it was all plastic.
Oh, was it? Yeah. Okay.
And the
all right.
pedals were attached to it at the axle.
Yes.
That was the pedal. So you just put your
Yeah.
foot out and just cranked. And if you crank too fast, and actually as they got older, the tread would wear down and you would just spin. I remember actually
Yes,
putting.
you need the traction control system on it.
Well, my traction control was wrapping it in duct tape because that at least gave me traction for a while until
Yeah.
the duct tape ran through.
Yeah.
But so we had a lot of fun with that little find, and who knows? I probably sold it at a garage sale when we moved or for something.
Yes.
You know, so that's my I think most interesting out of the blue. Why is it here? Find.
Yes. Well, you've sparked my memory now. I love these conversations because you always make me remember things I'd seemingly forgotten. I don't know how the human mind works, how these things are stored in the brain, but as a young kid now, one of my school friends, Joseph, and we would catch what was known as the Midland Red double-decker bus from our little village into the town of Loughborough. As kids, I mean, we'd have been, like 12, I guess, something like that. And I know in a previous episode we've talked about fish and chips being a big English tradition. So on a Saturday afternoon, occasionally what Joseph and I would do would catch the bus into Loughborough, and we would have a bag of fish, we couldn't afford the fish, it was too expensive, but we would have a bag of chips in one of the chip shops in Loughborough. And then, something which you simply can't do any longer, we would go to the junkyard, the scrap dealer in Loughborough, which was, when you're a kid, everything looks big and vast and enormous, right? But my memory of this scrapyard in Loughborough, down by the train station, it was this huge, great collection of old scrap cars. And we would knock on the door of the guy that owned it, and he was great. He would say, "Yes, just don't have an accident. You go around and have a look, see what you can find, And so we did spend all afternoon there in the summer holidays and the summer afternoons, and we'd be pulling sort of the glove box down and seeing what was in the glove box and looking at the engines, just fascinated by this collection of rusting automobile memorabilia.
Things that now would be worth a fortune.
Things that would be a fortune, but now worth a fortune. But of course, now you'd never be able to get permission from the owner to walk around for health and safety reasons, But it was never an issue back then. We'd be climbing on the hoods, on the bonnet, and on the roof, and trying to wind the windows down and climb inside, and all that sort of great adventure. Yeah, were you able to do that in the States too?
No, I mean, if you might have done it back in my era, but there just wasn't anything close by within walking. It just wasn't the option.
Yeah.
But I do remember my one cousin I would always stay with. My parents were going to a dinner or something like that. I stayed with my cousin Henry, who was much older. He was pretty older, retired by that time. But up the way from him, there was kind of an industrial area, and they had a lot of the big pipes and such like that, the big concrete pipes and such like that.
Yeah.
So when his daughter was back home, she and I would go up there, and sometimes we'd find and it was, I guess, either discarded or they were going to use them or whatever. So we don't feel like we were getting ourselves in too much trouble. But inevitably there'd be a spray paint can, so we would spray our names on the pipes or something like that. I think it's a far cry to call it graffiti, but
yes,
we did that and kind of knocked around that industrial area because it was also right next to a train track.
Oh, okay.
I don't think there was a stop there or anything, but there's kind of industrial with a train right next to his house.
Yeah, yes. Well, you were a bit of a trendsetter there, then, weren't you? If you're, don't the kids call it tagging? Something
Yes, yeah. I guess we were early tagging in the '70s, and don't do this at home. But,
no, and I wish the kids had never done it at all, really, personally. But that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I don't know even know what those, because there's a lot of just old scrap metal seemed to be around it, from a job or something that was either pulled out or what they had left over. It was all going somewhere. I don't think we're harming anything that was readily going to be seen or need to be. At least we hope we didn't.
Yes. But. Well, I remember those scrap yards there used to be a lot of scrap yards around in the 60s and 70s because a lot of folks, they relied on them to keep their cars going. I mean, there wasn't an awful lot of money around in England after the Second World War finished in 1945. It took a long while for England to get back on its feet financially, and there wasn't an awful lot of money to keep cars running, and we most folks couldn't afford new parts even if you could get them. So you'd go to the scrapyard to find parts to keep your car going.
Yeah, which is a great way of repurposing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember one of the first. I guess I can call it a hobby now. When I first started in the automotive industry as an apprentice mechanic, I had a Mark III Cortina. And the reason I wanted a Mark III Cortinas were very, very common. They're all over the place, Ford Cortinas.
Yeah, I know exactly what
And the
you're
Mark III Cortina looked a little bit like a Camaro, first generation Camaro, and I really wanted a first generation Camaro, but of course they weren't on the other side of the Atlantic. And so it was the nearest shape I could find to that. And the garage I worked for at the time, a little Mazda dealer, the chap that owned it, Terry Howlett, was very keen to train his apprentices to get involved and have an interest in mechanical engineering. And so I said to my boss one day, I would like to get hold of because it had a straightforward Pinto engine, the 2-litre Pinto engine it was very common in those Cortinas. And I said to my boss, I would love to put a V6 Ford V6 engine in, like a 3-litre Ford V6, which is the nearest thing we could get to a V8 to make it even more like a Camaro, you know. So I went down to the local scrapyard and found, I think out of a transit van, a big panel van, a 3-litre Ford engine. Paid hardly anything for it to the scrap guy, brought it back to the garage and stripped it down, and we even had in this little garage a rebore machine, which not many garages had, but we had one. So I rebored the block and rehoned it, put new pistons in, new bearings, rebuilt the engine, which taught me an awful lot. And then one weekend, I did an engine transplant on the Cortina and dropped the 3-litre V6 down into the car. Now, the reason this always sticks in my mind is simply this. All the time I had that Cortina, or any other Cortina I was looking at, the airbox had this cutout shape that I could never quite figure out what this cutout shape was for. It seemed to have no purpose, and there was lots of room around the engine bay in it. So I don't understand why Ford had moulded the shape of the airbox for the heater to have this cutout. But when I pulled out the 2-litre engine and discarded it, and then went to drop the V engine back in, and remember, you know, for those who are unfamiliar with mechanical engineering, a V engine looks like a V shape rather than a straight I, which would be a 4-cylinder straight 4. And when I dropped the V6 engine down into the engine bay, one of the cam covers from the V engine fitted absolutely perfectly into this pre-molded cutout into the heater box. And then it was it was a light bulb went on, like ding, oh, I see what Ford were doing now. They never put the 3-litre engine into that car, but one of the designers at Ford had obviously thought, if ever there was a time when we're going to put a 6-cylinder engine into this car, we need to make sure it can fit. So wow, it was one of those memories. It stuck with me from that day to today, thinking that's the sort of things you only discover if you're prepared to play.
And we need more thoughtful engineering like that today.
Yeah.
Instead of a car that once something goes, it's now just, we can't ever get it going again. And
yes,
just discard it.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose that's another great find. In a sort of metaphysical way, I suppose. It wasn't a find to get the engine because there was plenty of those, but the discovery of, the way that the shape of the heater box was formed was terrific, yeah.
Well, did you have any, where you were maybe in a thrift store or an antique store or such like that, and you just found something that was just quite a treasure or something like that maybe was really akin to what you were interested in or something like that?
Yes. This is another French memory for me, France memory, if you like. I've always been interested in history, as you know, the Second World War and the First World War, particularly the First World War, because of my friendship with dear old Mr. Goodman, who was a former soldier he'd taken part in the First World War. So I've always, and he told me his accounts of the First World War as a much younger kid, which I've written about, and so I've always had a sort of fascination for the First World War. And in France, they have a lot of little flea markets crop up every week called brocants. And it's just a flea market, it's just folks will gather and sell their stuff.
Yeah, I love a flea market.
Yes, and in one of these little brocante flea markets, I discovered some medals from the First World War from a combatant. So some dear old family member probably never made it back from the war. I don't know, or most definitely since died and moved on. But there was a frame and a photograph of the chap and 2 medals that had been presented. And I just remember looking at this, and it only cost a few francs to pick it up. But I just thought, wow, what a sort of wonderful memory of this terrible conflict. But and the photograph of the chap himself was there.
Oh wow!
Never
that's
knew who
great.
he was and his
addition.
story, but it was just great to have it. So I had it in my house in France on display for many years, and then when I eventually had to leave France because of work bringing it over to the States, I left it with the Fauconnet family, so they could have it. But it was just a wonderful little memento of. How often do you come across medals from the First World War? Well, if you look for them, probably you can find them relatively easy. But just to stumble across them in this little brocon was terrific.
Anything pre-eBay and stuff like that, you're always on a hunt
Yes.
or what you might find.
Yeah.
Now it's a whole different hunt or a ball game of trying to find something.
Now you are a great collector. You're certainly more of a collector than I am. And as we've spoken about in other episodes,
Again, my wife somewhere just went, ugh. But
I keep trying to sort of wean myself off collecting, but you still enjoy collecting very much, I think.
oh, somewhat. But actually, it's funny you mentioned flea market. That's actually one of the memories I have. This was probably, I think maybe first year of high school or something like that. We had been living in Florida for a couple of years, and I got into surfing and such like that and that kind of culture. But it wasn't when I was down in Florida, but when I was back in Maryville, Tennessee, which again we've been through, and actually we drove by that big flea market.
Yes.
On the way.
Yeah.
And I said that's where they hold the big flea market that I used to always
Yes.
go to when I was a kid. And we're walking up and down the road.
That's a big venue.
It's huge.
Yeah,
It's
right,
huge.
yeah.
And I was walking up and down the roads with my brother-in-law and probably my nephew and such. And there was this skim board there. Are you familiar with skim boards?
Is it okay? So do you throw it on right at the edge of the beach?
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
I know exactly.
It's a board, kind of has a little bit of an arrow shape to it.
Yes.
It's thin, and you throw it on the very thinnest
Yes.
part of the water, ebbing and flowing, and you just jump on it and slide.
Yeah.
Well, here was this Zap brand skim board made of fiberglass, which is a nice one,
Okay.
in this flea market in Maryville, Tennessee, and I bought it for $8. And I still have it to this day. I can still use it to this day. It is
great.
in my attic right now.
Yes. So forgive my ignorance of skim boards called, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Zap is the brand to have, is it?
No, well, I mean, they are one of the bigger ones, and maybe so. Yeah, I'm not familiar with all their things, but they've been around for a good long time, and I know they still sell them, are very popular. They may be the best ones out there. I'm not sure. But.
Yeah, yes. Now you say you could still use your skim board, but when was the last time you did use your skim board?
It's been a few years, but within the past 10 years, yes, I've had it out.
Yeah. Well, good for you. Yeah. Well, you're very into water sports, aren't you? It's surfing and skim boards and that sort of stuff. Is that's right up your alley, as they say.
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, again, we've mentioned the lake house before, and we bought that when I was 7, and I immediately started water skiing.
Yes.
And Dad had been into boating before I even came along, and it made perfect sense as something to do. So I started skiing young, and kind of just went on with that. And then I like doing anything water related. And once we got to Florida, we lived in Lake County, so there was a lot of skiing going on down there anyway. But then again, you could always pop in the car, and once we could drive, we'd be over on the sand in 45 minutes. So.
And your move down to Florida for you, I mean, you've shown me the apartment block and where you used to live and the beautiful beach and then the sea beyond. I mean, you must have been absolutely in your element when you moved down to Florida.
Yeah, that was the second time. This was after college, and I'd been in my career a few years. This was about 3 years ago when I moved to the building that you're talking about on Jacksonville Beach.
Yes.
But yeah, I was there. We moved in on a Sunday, and I had bought a new surfboard by Thursday, so I was surfing by the next weekend.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, I still remember vividly. It was going into. We moved in mid-October into that apartment, and so it was starting to get chilly.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a wetsuit yet. And I remember going out surfing because I had this new board. I hadn't been in a long time because I'd been living in Tennessee, so I would go out and freeze. But I was happier in the water because at least the wind wasn't whipping at me. So I was happier being in the cold water than being in the very cold air. But it wasn't too long. Within about probably 2-3 weeks, I finally broke down and bought a wetsuit and continued on.
I see what you mean. So when it is cold, when it's windy, you're better off being submerged in the water than keep getting back out of the water.
Yeah, because then you're just wet with the wind whipping at you, and it's even worse.
I never really thought about that. Yeah, I wonder why that never occurred to me before. Yeah. And who taught you the love of surfing? I mean, were you self-taught or?
I just think it's kind of the kids I was hanging around with, the guys. We just kind of evolved into that. I mean,
you just all did it.
Yeah. I think we kind of evolved from BMX bikes slowly into skateboards, and then it wasn't too long before, we were skateboarding a lot, but it just, let's surf too, kind of thing. And we ended up getting into that and skateboarded a lot more because we lived, in the Central Florida, and we could always skate every day anywhere. But then we'd make trips over to the beach and just do it.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating the things that you can find. If you start to look for them in antique fairs or flea markets or wherever, wonderful things that are there. But quite often I find there's a couple of fairly big antique centres in Charlotte, and of course you never know what you're going to find until you go in and look around. And it's just memories that the spark. Oh wow, yes, old vinyl albums. We've talked about that before, and the place down Charlotte, I think it's called the Sleepy Poet.
There is one. I've never been in it, but there's one called that.
They have quite a big vinyl department, but I like to see a lot of those things, just spark memories, even if you don't pick them up. I'm trying not to collect, so I'm not going to, please don't try and sell it to me, but I am interested in seeing it. Yeah, there's a lot of memories come back from that.
Well, the other thing that was similar to that is I still have fond memories of, especially when I was in Tennessee, my brother-in-law just liked to do this kind of thing. We would wake up real early on Saturday when I was visiting and hit the garage sales. So we'd go driving around and hit garage sales. And it's just always a lot of fun because you never, ever know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
And those are, I think, more interesting because people are just putting out whatever. And
so a garage sale, however, that's a yard sale. Is that the same? Is the same thing?
Here it's pretty much a generic term. Yeah, it can be in the yard, it can be in the garage, it can be in the carport.
Yeah.
Most people call them garage sales.
Yeah.
I guess it's interchangeable.
I ask because I don't think we have them over in England. I don't think. Maybe probably a little bit like Halloween. Things have changed, and maybe folks do have garage sales, yard sales. But yeah, we didn't used to have that, but we did have, which was, I guess, the communal equivalent of that would be what was known as a rummage sale. And so
maybe through a church or
exactly,
the school or
church
something.
Hall, exactly, the church or the school or the village hall, wherever it would be. Once or twice a year. There would be an announcement, an official announcement put up on the message board in the village. Collect all your things together. The next rummage sale is the 1st of June or whatever it would be.
Yep.
And trestle tables would be set up in the village hall or in the vicarage or, as you say, in the church or the school or wherever. And everyone would bring their stuff they did want. Most of it was broken. Otherwise, we would have still had it.
Mm-hmm.
And you used to get great fun out of that. It used to be something like a penny to go in, so there was like a door entry fee of a penny, and and then you would walk around, and sometimes you'd find a toy that you really liked, or for me it would be things like a different uniform for an action man, or that sort of stuff.
That spurred a memory of me going. But this is what was at a garage sale, but it was in Tennessee when my brother-in-law were knocking around. This was in the 80s somewhere, and somebody had an original James Bond Thunderball board game.
Oh, wow.
And the pieces had never been punched out on it. It was just literally as it had just come off the shelf, and I bought it for $0.25. And I had it up until 2 years ago, and I sold it to someone for, I think, $30. So that's not a bad return on your money.
That's a good return. Well, we've said it before, you like collecting, but you get great pleasure from that sort of stuff, don't you? I think, and I love to hear your stories of things you've found, and But to have found an old board game that hasn't been punched out, there can't be many of those. It's like trying to find we've both got an interest in, the whole world's got an interest in Star Wars, but to find one of the original Star Wars toys that's never been out of its box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's funny because, like I say, it was in the 80s or something like that, and I would zone. I knew that stuff, but I could be at the same garage sale and zone in on, say, a Star Wars figure, and they may have had a Fabergé egg in the corner for $1 that's worth $10 million. I wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah,
but I could zone in on the R2-D2 figure and know what I'm looking at. So you wonder how many of those things that you did walk right by or didn't snag, but that's all.
Oh, they would have been there for sure. They would have been there. Yeah. Old oil paintings and things that have been handed down from generation to generation. They've been in the garage, and then, some relative dies, and you don't know what to do, and the house is cleared out. And
I mean, there's tons and tons of those stories, and you're looking at it like, I just have to hit one, just one. That's a huge one like that to make it all worthwhile.
Yeah, but I'm very much like you. Like, I wouldn't know a real Fabergé egg from a fake. If it bonked me on the nose. But I must admit, and I don't know if this is a guy thing, I feel exactly the same about, jewelry and diamonds. I mean, I look at a diamond and I can't tell if it's good or bad. I can't tell the difference between a $10,000 diamond and a $500 diamond. I mean, that beauty is lost on me. So I guess we're all interested in different things, but I am lost on where jewelry gets its price from, really.
Well, that's why there's experts in every field, and they know their stuff. And
yeah, but I wish I had discovered a Fabergé egg. I must have been absolutely thrilled.
Oh, but I tell you, I watch those like Antiques Roadshow shows and stuff like that, and you're just amazed at what people have discovered.
I know.
You're right, wasn't there? Oh, this was passed down from my uncle. Is it worth anything? And they're like, well, I would insure this for $1 million, and they about hit the floor.
Yes. Well, next time we go shopping somewhere, we should go. If we go on one of our story reading dinner venues somewhere, we must look out and see if we can find where the next sale is going to be, and have a look around and see what we can see.
Yeah, you might find something that is from merry old England that I don't have a clue what it is, and you go, oh yeah, we had 10 of those when I was a kid.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many wonderful. I mean, I can see those. England is such a in the grand scheme of things, certainly relative to the States, England is so tiny. That there's so much, and again, there's a lot of history in England, of course. So there must be hundreds of thousands of wonderful antiques that are still around there waiting to be discovered. I mean, you could take England and turn it on its side and drop it into California to just disappear, and that's just obviously one state, But there's a great concentration of antiques in England for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, the U.S. is so diverse, and there's stuff up in the New England countries that probably have antiques that were shipped over, in the very earliest days of the country that are still in that area.
Yeah.
But then you have a whole different set when the West was won and tamed, and people going out west, and that are cowboy-related artifacts and such like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, you're right. And as you start to move from the original 13 colonies, and you start to move west, the what you would find, the treasure you would find, would change. I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Certain things are known for their region and where you're going to find them. But like I say, it is very odd when you can find something, like a skimboard in the middle of Tennessee.
Yes.
But along those same lines, I mean, at the time I was working for a restaurant in Knoxville, and my boss just kind of, we got to talking about how you came from Florida and I surfed and stuff. And he said, "Oh, there's an old surfboard under the house I bought. Do you want it?" And I said, "Yes, I want it."
There you go. That's just what we're talking about.
So we drug it out, and it was some board from the 60s, and it weighed a ton. But I had it in until I moved back to Florida, but it went with me. And I took it down there and rode it a few times. But
that's exactly what we're talking about. I'm a big believer in that. They're still there. I mean, we both have a great appreciation for the automotive industry, and those barn finds are still being found. I mean, occasionally another one will be discovered.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, my friend here in town, Tom Cotter, he writes he's known as the barn find hunter. And he's written many books. They're like The Cobra in the Barn and such like that. And he's done quite well. He calls it automotive archaeology. So
so it really is. I mean, I think fairly recently, I'm very unclear on the details of this, but fairly recently another old Ferrari was found in a barn in France, I think, from the 60s. From the whether it was a 275 or whatever it was, but something fairly recently has been discovered in France. I'm sure
Really?
I read that online. Yeah, not too long ago. So these things are still out there. But a bit like me never finding money on the floor, £5 note on the floor.
The chance of finding a rare Italian treasure is going to be...
Yes, the chance of me finding a 275 V12 Ferrari, for me personally, I think are not going to happen. You've got a lot of luck, so you might find it.
I hope. I still have that hope.
Well, we better begin to wrap this episode up, I think.
I think so. I think we covered a good bit of interesting ground today.
Yes. I'm not sure what did we start the conversation? Oh, collectibles.
Fines.
Yeah, we went full circle, didn't we? We finished where we started, which is probably a good thing to do. Well, gentle listener, there we are. Another episode in the bag, as they say. And do please join Kevin and myself again when we record another episode of Matching the Other Guy. Kevin, would you like to say goodbye?
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye.